Greetings, vinyl community. I hope everyone is doing well. I have not done a video like this in quite a while, in a couple years, I think, since my T-Rex video, A Beginner's Guide to T-Rex, which a lot of you have seen. So if you've seen that video, thank you very much for watching that. I've been wanting to do this video for a long time, and considering the band has a new album coming out right away called All Aboard the Skylark, and I have time to do this properly, I thought now would be a good time to do this video. This is a beginner's guide to Hawkwind, 1970 to 1980, and we'll talk in a bit why I decided to cover that period, 1970 to 1980. But first of all, cheers everyone. Like my T-Rex video, there's going to be a slight disclaimer here. I'm going to talk about the albums in very cursory terms, just in the interest of time. And also, I'm hoping the people clicking on this video will be newbies to Hawkwind who are looking to dip their toe into the proverbial waters of Hawkwind, which admittedly can get quite convoluted, to say the least. But there might be people clicking on this video who are Hawkwind experts, who know the band front to back, side to side, who know every nuance of the band much more than I do. And as I'm recording this video with no notes, and this is all off the top of my head, I hope everyone forgives me if I make the odd error here and there. I'm trying not to. I'm going to do my best, but try not to crucify me in the comment section. Like I said, I'm going to do my best, just going off of memory. But having said that, this will be Beginner's Guide to Hawkwind, 1970 to 1980, and we're going to start with their very first album, simply called Hawkwind. This is an album I got into much later with my experience with Hawkwind. I primarily knew the song Hurry on Sundown and kind of wrongly assumed the whole album sounded like that. It's an album of two tales. You get that song, which is an old busking song Dave Brock used to do on the streets of Ladbroke Grove, which I went to when I was in London last time. And if you've seen old videos of Hawkwind down in that area, Ladbroke Grove in London, the area now, like most of London, looks nothing like it. So it was a little bit disappointing, but I can say I was there. Anyways, it's an old busking song that Dave Brock used to do, and it's very dissimilar from the rest of the album. The rest of the album, apart from that song, Hurry on Sundown, is a band just beginning to find its feet and forming its sound into what would later become space rock, as we call it now. I'm not sure if they called it that back then. But it's a band, like I said, just beginning to find its feet, developing that sound. Like I said, I'm going to talk about these albums in very cursory terms, and maybe if you're a newbie, give you a couple songs or a song or two just to kind of sample to get an idea of what this album is all about, or an album is all about. You know what? Sample the song Hurry on Sundown. It's an essential Hawkwind song. It's, like I said, it's very dissimilar from everything else that they've done. But, and the rest of the album kind of you would need to listen to unto itself. Do I think it's the place to start? Normally with a band, when I recommend a band, I would say start at the beginning, and you can kind of follow their musical journey, as it were. In this case, I'm going to say no, this is not probably the album you should start with. This is an album you should probably get into or digest later on, and it kind of adds a little bit more context into what the band later became. Like I said, I'm not going to give the album's ratings. I'm just going to say this is not the album you should start with. Great album, but like I said, not the place you should start with. But like I said, having said that, very, very good album. Hawkwind's first album from 1970. And then we go on to 1971's In Search of Space, which is a band who's really has found its place. A band that's really starting to perfect that, what we'd like said we call what would become space rock. Extended pieces. This has the song "You Shouldn't Do That," which is one of my favorite Hawkwind songs, and a song that I think you should probably sample. I'm gonna cheat a little bit and look at the song titles. "Master of the Universe" is on this album, so I would say those two songs, "You Shouldn't Do That" and "Master of the Universe," are probably the songs you should sample off this album. Great Hawkwind album. This and the next couple albums I'm going to talk about, I think, are the core albums, in my opinion. You might disagree, but the core albums I think you should probably start with. And In Search of Space being one of them. Next album is 1972's. So we got 70, 71, and 72. The band tended to do an album a year. So we're into 1972's. Do, Re, Mi, Fa, Sol, La, La, Ti, Do. I hope I said that right. As far as studio albums go, I think this is probably maybe the place you should start. This has Brainstorm on it and Space is Deep, which I think are the first two songs on the album and the songs I think you should sample. An album that's a band that's like as far as that space rock chugga 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 long pieces go, they're perfecting that sound. Great album. I think one of the best albums in the Hawkwind catalog, in my opinion. Some people might disagree, and there's a couple albums later on that a lot of people think are is the quintessential Hawkwind album. Me personally, I think this is as far as studio albums go. I think this is the place people might want to start for studio albums. Is Do, Re, Mi, Fa, Sol, La, La, Ti, Do from 1972, and then we get. I debated whether to talk about live albums, but I would be remiss if I didn't include this album because it's Hawkwind has a lot of live albums, but this album in particular is possibly one of the best live albums of all time of any genre. Is Space Ritual. This copy, as you can see, is signed by Nick Turner, who I won't talk about a whole lot, as he kind of is a volatile subject within the Hawkwind fan base. So we won't talk about Nick Turner, but I got to meet him and he signed my copy of Space Ritual. It's a live album, 1973, and I don't think there's any other band, maybe apart from Kiss, where I'd say start with Kiss Alive. Start with this one. This is the album that got me into the band. This is the album you're listening to in the background. Like I said, one of the greatest albums of all time. This is a band in full flight. This is space rock. It doesn't get none better than Space Ritual. If you listen to this album and you don't like it, then you're not into Hawkwind. Let's just say that. This is the album that hooked me into the band. I'm a person who likes that long, like I said, a lot of people describe it as chugga 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 chugga, the long jammy songs. That sound of Hawkwind, that is what I love personally. This album is all about that, and it's just fantastic. Like I said, one of the greatest albums of all time, live albums of all time, in my opinion, and I think the most representational of Hawkwind is Space Ritual. Then we go into 1974, Hall of the Mountain Grill. By this time, and I think this goes back to Do, Re, Mi, Fa, Sol, La, La, Ti, Do. They've had a change of, by that album, they had a change of rhythm sections. Terry Ollis is gone, who I thought was a fantastic drummer. And by that album, Do, Re, Mi, you have Lemmy, the infamous and famous Lemmy on bass, and then you have Simon King on drums, which brought a lot to the band. And none so much as in Hall of the Mountain Grill, the next album I'm going to talk about. This album, there's a core of albums, I would say, from that period, you really got to get into. Space Ritual should be the first, in my opinion, and Do, Re, Mi is kind of in there, along with this album, Hall of the Mountain Grill. If you want to sample some songs off this album, if you're a newbie fan to Hawkwind or want to get into Hawkwind, the Psychedelic Warlords, and You'd Better Believe It are two of my personal favorites off this album and from the Hawkwind catalog. Hall of the Mountain Grill, fantastic album from 1974, I believe. One of those core Hawkwind albums, in my opinion. And then you get Warrior, On the Edge of Time from 1975. This is what a lot of people would consider to be the quintessential Hawkwind album. This is an album where the band is tightening up its sound a bit. It's not so jammy, for lack of a better term. A lot of that chugga 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 sound long extended pieces are gone. Although you get Assault and Battery Part 1 and The Golden Void Part 2, which is 10 minutes long. A lot of the songs are shorter and more concise. They're more song-based. You still get Simon House on drums. You still get Nick Turner, Dave Brock, and Lemmy on bass. Like I said, this is his last appearance on a Hawkwind album as a full-time member. It is a fantastic album. I said a lot of people think this is the album you should start with. I mean, you couldn't go wrong with that recommendation, but in my opinion, it's in that top 3. If you want to sample some songs off this album to get an idea what this album is all about, Kings of Speed is a great song. And The Golden Void Part 2 and Assault and Battery Part 1 are good places to start, in my opinion. Warrior on the Edge of Time, fantastic album from 1975. And then we get into some really weird Hawkwind. This is when Lemmy's gone, and the band slightly changes. I mean, you get Robert Calvert making appearances on Space Ritual, and then he makes a full return on Astounding Sounds. Robert Calvert is someone you can make a whole other video about. That's a whole other story, but his contributions to Hawkwind were fantastic and great and probably deserving of a whole other video. But he comes in and out of the Hawkwind story, as does Michael Moorcock, which is, like I said, a whole other story. But you get Astounding Sounds, amazing music by Hawkwind. And not my favorite Hawkwind album. Like I might have said earlier, once you dip your toe in the waters of Hawkwind and you are hooked, like I was, everything from 70 to 80 I think is essential. But if you're buying one at a time, this is maybe one I would maybe get to last, as it's a very different sounding Hawkwind. They have, I could be bad at descriptions here, but there's a little bit of R&B and funk sounds, if you get my drift. Like I said, if you want to sample a song, sample Reefer Madness, which is my favorite song off the album. Like I said, this should maybe be, in my opinion, the bottom end of the Hawkwind albums that you kind of you might acquire from this era that I'm talking about. A lot of people love this album, and fair play if you do. I'm not saying it's a bad Hawkwind album, but from this era, it's in the bottom rung, in my opinion. Astounding Sounds, amazing music by Hawkwind. By this time, they're on a new. They've left United Artists. They're on Charisma Records, and they've jumped label to label. And I believe this is the first album on Charisma. I could be wrong. And yeah, it's there in the catalog. But like I said, it's maybe one of the last albums you should probably buy. And then we go on to a slight return to form, in my opinion. Quirkiness, Strangeness, and Charm. Robert Calvert's back in the band. Good album. Slight return to form. Like I said, the band is quite developed on since Space Ritual. A lot of the space rock roots are they're there, but they've developed onto more song-based music. And you can hear that in the last couple albums I talked about, but especially in Quirkiness, Strangeness, and Charm. Great album. Not the album I think you should start with, but it has maybe my favorite Hawkwind song ever, which is, and I'm going to pronounce this wrong, Hassan I Sabah, which I think is one of the songs that essential Hawkwind songs, in my opinion. And then you can also sample Quark, Strangeness, and Charm. Great album. Like I said, a slight return to form after Astounding Sounds. Not, like I said, not the place I would start with Hawkwind, but one of those albums you can add on to later, and you can kind of later on to see how the band is developing from Hurry on Sundown to the space rock era, more into the song-based Hawkwind. And then we get an album which is quite easy to find, which a lot of people pass by because it doesn't overtly say Hawkwind, but it is ostensibly a Hawkwind album. And due to legal reasons, the band had to change their name for a short period to the Hawklords. And then you get 25 Years On by the Hawklords. The core of Dave Brock and Robert Calvert is still there, and I think it's a fantastic album. It has very little to do. Well, not, maybe I'm wrong in saying this. It has very little to do with the early '70s Hawkwind, but you get songs like Psy Power and Free Fall, which are two of my favorite Hawkwind songs as well. If I was to make a Hawkwind playlist, whenever I say it's two of my favorite songs that would be on my Hawkwind playlist, is Psy Power and Free Fall, especially Free Fall. A fantastic album. It's kind of like a standalone album, as it has the Hawklord's name on it, but it is part of their catalog, and like I said, I think it's a great album personally. 25 years on by the Hawklords. And then we get into PXR5, I believe from 1979. Fantastic album. It's from the inside of an electrical plug looking out, if you understand what I'm saying. Great artwork. The album itself, to me, it kind of stands off to the side with Astounding Sounds as one of the later albums I think you should pick up. A lot of people, like I said, love this album. Like I said, it's maybe one of the later albums I think you should add to your Hawkwind collection, in my opinion. PXR5. If you want to sample a song, sample Death Trap. And after that, there's some good songs. Robot, I think, is good. But I think it's one of those later albums you should probably add to your Hawkwind catalog. Not the greatest album, in my opinion, is PXR5. It's there in the catalog. You need to have it if you're into Hawkwind, but like I said, it's if you're adding to your collection, it's probably one of the later ones you should get. And then we get the final album we're going to talk about is this album here called Levitation. From what I read, and I could be wrong, it could be fantasy, it could be made up, but by this time they've left Charisma. They're on to Bronze Records, which is the label that Motorhead was on at the time. And I have read, right or wrong, could be wrong, that Bronze signed Hawkwind as a favor to Lemmy, and they didn't really want the band on their label. They didn't promote them a whole lot. So the album is there, and it found an audience. I think it did well at the time, and then it found an audience later on. It's a very guitar-based, hard-sounding Hawkwind. So if you're into that kind of stuff, this is a good place to start. By this time, the famous and infamous Ginger Baker is on drums on this album. I think he makes a fantastic contribution to the sound. It's Ginger Baker. And there's a promo clip on YouTube floating around of them doing Levitation kind of in a studio setting, which is kind of a promotional video. I think you should see that. You can see Ginger Baker. And I think the song Levitation is the song you should start with Motorway City and Psychosis. I think it's a fantastic album, although it's a very, very guitar-heavy based album, which is what this kind of sound at the time was. I think it's like I said, you got Dave Brock, Hugh Lloyd Langdon on this album, Harvey Bainbridge is on this album, and you get Ginger Baker. And it's unfortunate that he didn't continue his association with the band after this album. He was booted out, as Dave Brock likes to do with people, like Nick Turner and like a few other people down the line. Out. But this standalone album that Ginger Baker is on, Levitation, is fantastic. Like I said, a whole other different sound, but nonetheless, it's Hawkwind, and I think it's in the top, in my opinion, it's in the top 4 albums you should probably add to your Hawkwind collection. Is Levitation, 1980, and the final album we're going to talk about. After this, the Hawkwind catalog gets a little bit convoluted. Yes, there were member changes from 70 to 80, but from 80 to present day, although the lineup now is kind of solidified, there's that gray area period where there's a lot of lineup changes, and I think that should be a whole other video, is 1981, let's say, to present day. But there's some great albums within that, like Alien 4, with Ron Wall on vocals, which I think is a fantastic album. And I think that album sits nicely along with the 70 to 80 period. But there's a lot of albums between 81 and now, and that might be a 2 hour long video, to be honest with you. So anyways, I'm going to wrap this up here. That is a very cursory and very kind of elementary, quick look. Like I said, a beginner's guide to look at the Hawkwind catalog, what I would consider would be that classic era period between 1970 and 1980. And I hope I gave some good recommendations for you to sample songs on. And I hope if you've not experienced Hawkwind, or you have very limited knowledge of them and you want to get into them, this kind of helps you out a bit. Start with Space Ritual. You won't regret it. It's one of the greatest albums of all time, in my opinion. And then I said you can work your way backwards, forwards. There's some, like I said, I hope you take what I say for what it is. I'm just a fan, just like hopefully you are, or you will become, because I think they're a band that, although their legacy lives on, they're a band that's should be, I think, celebrated more, in my opinion. Anyways, not to go on too long, not to blabber on too long, that was my beginner's guide to Hawkwind 1970 to 1980, and I hope you enjoyed it. Leave a comment if you want. I'm sure a lot of people might disagree with me for what I'm saying about these albums, but that's my opinion. And if you disagree, you can make your own video and tell me what albums you love by Hawkwind. And having said that, I want to say thank you for watching this video. I appreciate it. This has been David Michael, aka Nomad, and I hope you get into Hawkwind, because they are a fantastic group. And once you're hooked, you won't stop buying their albums. Trust me. And yeah. So having said that, I want to say thank you to everyone, and peace, and we'll see you next time.